My guest today is Katherine Newman, a professor of sociology and public affairs at Princeton and soon to be Dean of Arts and Sciences at Johns Hopkins University, one of the nation's leading experts on inequality in America. Thank you for joining us, Dr.
Thank you for
Newman.
having me, Michael.
The focus of your current research is taxing the poor.
That's right.
In America. Can you tell us what that entails?
I got very interested in the role of regressive taxation on the poverty picture, which is a subject that nobody has really looked into very much. But especially in the southern states and increasingly in the West as well, the public sector is being financed through sales taxes, which have a regressive impact on the poor, meaning they take a bigger chunk of the household income of poor people. And it turns out that there is a massive effect that regressive taxation has on almost every dimension of poverty that we know about, from out-of-wedlock childbearing to early mortality to crime to low educational attainment. In the states that use this form of taxation, we have much more serious problems of those kind. You know, we've spent a lot of time looking at things like income and wages and education, all of which are very important drivers of the poverty problem. But it turns out that this tax policy is extremely damaging to the poor. It is driving the worst outcomes we can possibly imagine and making it much more expensive by creating families without family heads because they've died early, or people who are in jail, or people who are having children out of wedlock. Now, how did this happen? It turns out that this has a very deep history. It goes all the way back to the radical Reconstruction period after the Civil War, in which white elites in the South wanted to take away the tax instrument that African Americans used during radical Reconstruction to fund the public sector, and they began putting in amendments that looked just like Proposition 13 in California. So way, way back in the 1800s, we see the emergence of these supermajority rules that make it impossible to raise any other kind of tax. And that leaves these states that are very poor in general raising taxes through sales tax at the bottom.
Well, the irony is the southern states claim to be Jeffersonian. Jefferson himself supported a tax system in which the poor would pay nothing. You would have a tariff, which he thought of as a luxury consumption tax on foreign imports, would fall almost entirely on the rich. His Secretary of the Treasury, Albert Gallatin, proposed a land tax. And in fact, we had federal property taxes both during the quasi-war with France in 1798 and War of 1812.
And not since.
Not since. But let me just ask you, I can guess your views on this, but to me, the most evil tax is the lottery.
Yeah.
The very idea that instead of taxing affluent people in order to pay for goods like public schools and roads, the government itself would get into the business of tricking poor people into thinking they're going to win a lottery when the odds are in favor of the house is just obscene, isn't it?
It is, and it turns out, I was just looking at some of the data on the Hope Scholarship process. The Hope Scholarships, which began in Georgia and then spread rapidly throughout the South, is a good example of this whole tax philosophy, because if we look at who plays the lottery, it's predominantly poor people who play the lottery. But who are the beneficiaries of the Hope Scholarships? Well, they are predominantly the well-to-do. These are the kids who do well in high school, and that's who gets the Hope Scholarships. Now, it turns out this is true for African Americans as well as whites. So, in fact, the Hope Scholarships raised the level of African American college attendance, but it drastically diminished the amount of aid that was available in those states for means-tested scholarships.
So it's a lottery in its own right.
It's a lot. Well, it's funded by the lottery.
Right.
The Hope Scholarship is paid for by lottery winnings, and so it's a transfer from the poor to the affluent in those states. And it, interestingly enough, rapidly spread throughout the South. And so once again we see, the power of regressive taxation. This is a form of regressive taxation for supporting programs that benefit everyone other than the poor. And it is really damaging. I mean, whatever you make of the social justice argument, and I think it's a stretch on those grounds, it merely makes everything worse. And this is not ancient history. From the early 1980s to 2008, we are seeing a huge ratcheting up in the southern states and in the western states in regressive taxation. So this is a problem that requires a lot more attention, and it's particularly damaging when it applies to food. In the southern states, this huge block of the southern states, food is taxed at up to 10–11%. And so you're funding the public sector on the backs of poor people who are paying an additional 10% for the very staff of life.
Well, as a Southerner myself, I can say that...
you have to atone.
No, enlightened Southerners like Lyndon Johnson favored federal revenue sharing, in part for that reason, because if you collect taxes at the federal level, it's largely going to be in a few very affluent metropolitan areas where all of the billionaires and millionaires live. But then you get these desperately poor states like Mississippi and New Mexico don't have to raise all of their revenue from within their states.
No, the federal government's charged in
Right.
to help those poor states.
And one of the proposals we're working on here at the New America Foundation is using a national VAT. Now, at first glance, a VAT would seem to be regressive, just like a sales tax. But you can, if you have a national VAT and then you share the revenues and you replace sales taxes, that immediately creates a more progressive system. In addition, if you use the VAT to cut other taxes on the poor, like the payroll tax, you can move it in a more progressive direction.
My only concern is all those ifs. What I worry about with the national VAT tax is that we'll get the tax without all of the progressive subpinnings that you're talking about. You know, in Europe, the VAT tax is very popular, and that's because there's a massive redistribution in Europe. I think that the first thing that would happen if we passed a national VAT tax is we would see this go toward deficit reduction. I'm not persuaded it will go in the progressive redistribution fashion that you're talking about. If we could be absolutely certain of that, then I would have fewer reservations about it. But a regressive tax that is not spent through progressive means looks just like the South, and it looks bad.
You know, we don't want that. We can agree that we don't want a national lottery.
That is very true.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Newman,
It was a
for
pleasure.
joining us.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Michael.
it.